So, with that being said, let's get the ball rolling. Caller, good morning. You're on KRMS.
Yes, I just would like whoever was in charge of the drawdown for the lake
Yes.
should not hesitate in the future to lower the lake and avoid thousands of dollars to property owners for damage.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like someone to call in or someone to explain with the knowledge why they hesitated when they knew this was coming. It's not like we didn't know it was not coming. And so now you have hundreds of thousands of damage to property owners, which could have been avoided. Thank you.
Well, I don't think it's as simple as a lot of people realize and understand. And I had put the call out last week to talk to officials at Ameren. And right now, there is no one who is willing to step up and talk. And that is not, let me tell you this much. It is not about the folks here locally. And like I said, everything that we want to do, I mean, we can make a phone call and we can ask people to come on and we can ask people to talk about it. And I've done that. But all of those people are required to go through higher-ups, and the higher-ups are saying at this point that there's nothing to talk about. And I don't mean that there's nothing to talk about. They are just in a position where they don't want to say anything right now. And for whatever reason, I can't do anything about that, and I continue to call and continue to ask. And like I said, a lot of the local folks would love to be able to come on, but a lot of the higher-ups are the ones that have been put in charge of answering questions in regards to what happened with the rainfall, with the flooding, and that's basically where it's at. So we have talked to and tried to talk to, and we'll continue to try to talk to officials with Ameren and to get somebody into this radio station or on the phone to answer some of these questions. 9:14 is our time. Caller, good morning. You're on KRMS.
Good morning.
Good morning.
To your caller's point, I think that a lot of us share that same concern because it was only a few short years ago that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission put out a order to literally remove 5,000 houses from the shores of Lake of the Ozarks. And when you realize that FERC, not Ameren, controls when the dam is open, how much it's open, that's the federal government that is basically putting their thumb on Ameren, telling them when and how the dam is to be open. That's a problem. And especially when you take a look at what's happening like in Texas with the Red River, the federal government is doing the same thing there that they tried to do here a couple of years ago. And so I think what a lot of us are wondering is, are they going just to, move these houses off the shoreline from flooding us? I mean, it's a question that we have, but to that point, I want to bring up a conversation. You had Rocky Miller on last week, and I want to give the listeners food for thought. He has introduced legislation that if the lake is at 661, I think 0.5 or 0.3, the lake will be no wake automatically, and that's through legislation. The problem I have with that, I agree. I live on the lake. I think that boats, when the lake is flooding, there's no place for boats on the lake. However, when we have no ability, when the federal government gets to decide how full the lake is held, because they operate the Corps of Engineers above us, and they get to operate this dam. If they hold us at 661, even an inch over what his legislation calls for, they can literally shut any boat traffic down on our lake by state law all summer long. And when you understand that they hold it, they can hold those levels. That's a pretty scary proposition for our economy and the whole livelihood of our lake.
I want to step in. I want to step in here for just a moment, and I want to understand something that you're telling me here, and I want to reiterate that you made a point about the Federal Energy and Regulatory Commission and FERC, and that is absolutely 100% true. Bagnell Dam, by the rules set up by FERC, that is how they release the water. They have the specific FERC guidelines that they are expected to uphold, and that is very true. Bagnell Dam, the folks at Bagnell Dam don't do anything unless they get the approval from FERC. And so, yes, it runs into a government type of situation. But I just, when you say certain things about flooding residents that live on the Lake of the Ozarks, how many folks do you think that work at Ameren, Missouri, actually have homes on the lake? And
I agree.
And I think you would be interested to know the number. So these folks would essentially be flooding themselves out.
No, they have no control. Ameren has no control. They are, as I understand it, they are completely at the will and mercy of the federal government, of FERC. Mm-hmm. And so I understand what you're saying, and I agree completely. Mm-hmm. They're not doing this. I think that to bark up Ameren's tree is barking up the wrong tree, because at the end of the day, they literally submit to what the federal government, FERC, tells them to do.
So, and knowing that, don't you think that if these people that work for Ameren that live on the Lake of the Ozarks know what the guidelines are, don't you think that they would live up a little bit higher so that their homes weren't the ones that were getting flooded out like everybody else? And maybe that's an interesting question. Let's ask how many folks that work for Ameren live on the Lake of the Ozarks and actually live up high enough, knowing full well about what you just said there.
But is that a moving target? I think that's the question. Mm-hmm. I mean, and that's a question that I guess needs to be asked. Are there regulations set in stone that if it floods this much, we're going to open Truman this much, and then in turn, I mean, is that set in stone and through policy, or are literally they waiting for a phone call to say you can do this or not? Because that's a moving target. When you deal with the administration that we're dealing with right now, and I dealt with FERC. I was on conference calls with FERC. And the thing that's so astounding to me, and that was back when they were trying to literally take houses off our shoreline. Mm-hmm. The issue becomes they are bureaucrats sitting in Washington, D.C., who have never even been to this lake, let alone the Midwest. And they're dictating for our area, our region, how our dam's going to be operated. And therefore, the issue that I have with that is that that's where people, I think we need to be very conscientious, mm-hmm. and the question needs to be asked, are there hard-line policies set in place for those kind of rainfalls? And did Ameren miss the boat? Which I don't believe, my instinct is they did not, because I literally think that it's a moving target. And that's where it's scary, when the federal government, and again, in dealing with FERC on a very intimate level, as mm-hmm. we did when we were fighting that issue a few years ago, it's amazing to me that they have such control over our lake here by way of the Clean Water Act.
So if these floods would have never occurred, do you think we'd be having this conversation right now? But about the way the water is regulated from Truman through Bagnell Dam on down into the Osage River, on down to the Mississippi. Do you think, but as far as that conversation, sure, but do you think we'd be having another conversation about how the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission is trying to get houses off this lake? 5,000, or we'd be looking at it from another aspect, like we have already done.
Right, and I think that as long as, I think that there are very well-intentioned people with the laws that they're trying to put in place, mm-hmm. but unfortunately that opens the door, that the federal government already has too much control over our lake, and right. I think that's what people need to realize. Don't solidify that in state law, because what you're doing potentially, when they have as much control as they do, that could be so incredibly detrimental, even if it's an inch over that amount, to think that they could potentially hold it at that level. And again, if you think that's crazy, look at what they're doing right now in Texas with all those property owners on the Red River.
Yeah.
It's astounding, but thank you so much.
Thank you for your phone call. I appreciate it. 8:21 is our time. Look at what they did to the folks, the ranchers in Oregon, and why those people are up in arms where they're at right now. That started out as farmers that had settled that land. They came up with a way to irrigate the land so that the ranchers could water their cattle. President stepped in 2008, made it a migratory bird sanctuary / Indian reservation. They eventually got in and took over. They wanted those farmers out. They flooded the land, forced a lot of them out. And then the folks with the federal government, Bureau of Land Management, Fish and Wildlife Service, they were trying to get more and more and more of this land. Finally, these farmers who had been flooded out turned around and tried to sell their land. They upped the fees for grazing this land that was owned by the government. Well, if you don't think it's a possibility, I guess you need to kind of look back in history and see where we are. This situation with the Hammonds going on in Oregon right now is exactly what the federal government will do if they want the land bad enough. Go back to the phones. Caller, I've got time for one more quick call before I got to go to the break. Caller, go ahead. You're on KRMS.
Good. This will be a quick one. I just wanted to go back to the subject with the caller regarding FERC and our dams. I'd like to remind the listeners of our maps that were provided by FEMA that determine floodplains in our area and how much trouble we had convincing the feds that a bluff wasn't going to flood and things like that, just for the same reasons that she was talking about. They'd never been here. So I think that this whole subject is something that we definitely, as people of the lake, need to be alert to. I was unaware of the control that FERC had on that, and thank you so much for taking that call, and I hope you all follow up on this.
All right, thank you for your phone call this morning at 9:24. I've got to take a break, folks.